I never liked the ocean. It always felt too vast, too unpredictable, too full of secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. But here I was, standing on the edge of a rented fishing boat, staring at the calm surface of the sea that hid God knows what underneath. It started with an old story, a sunken ship, untouched for decades, lying somewhere off the coast. No name, no history, just whispers among locals about its strange disappearance. My friends, Tom, Emily, and Carter were excited. They called it an adventure, a chance to find something extraordinary. I didn't feel the same, but I went along. Curiosity, or maybe something else, kept me from saying no. We found the spot easily enough. The equipment beeped, confirming the wreck's location about 50 meters down. The sea was eerily calm, as if it were waiting for us. The kind of calm that makes you question if it's a warning or an invitation. The first thing I noticed when we descended was the silence. There's a specific kind of quiet underwater, not peaceful, but oppressive. Every breath through the regulator echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of how fragile I was down there. The ship loomed out of the murk, its hull tilted at an odd angle, covered in algae and barnacles. It wasn't large, maybe a small freighter, but it felt bigger than it should have, like it was alive in its stillness. Tom went ahead, his flashlight cutting through the green haze, while Emily and Carter followed. I lingered, staring at the way the light danced on the ship's surface. There was something unsettling about it. Something wrong. We entered through a breach in the hull. Inside, the water felt thicker, heavier, as if it were trying to push us back out. The beams of our flashlights illuminated the interior, revealing rusted machinery, broken crates, and debris scattered across the floor. That's when we found the belongings. A camera, its strap tangled around a chair. A bracelet, its silver chain glinting faintly, and journals, several of them, floating in the debris. Emily grabbed one and flipped it open, the pages waterlogged but still legible. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. The waves are too strong. We're not going to make it, but it's not the storm I'm afraid of. It's him. I felt a chill despite the wetsuit. The words didn't make sense, yet they carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide behind the mask, and I knew she felt it too. As we ventured deeper, the wreck told its story. Scratch marks on the walls like someone had tried to claw their way out. Ropes, frayed but still tied in strange, desperate knots. A metal door hanging open, revealing a room that made my stomach turn. There were stains on the walls, faint, rust-colored streaks that could have been anything. But I knew what they were. Tom was the first to break the silence. "We need to keep moving," he signaled. His hands trembled slightly, a motion I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't already looking for cracks in his composure. It was in the captain's quarters that we found the journal. It was bound in leather, the cover warped and peeling, but it felt heavier than it should have. Carter opened it, flipping through the pages quickly, his movements sharp and impatient. The entries started innocently enough. Notes about weather patterns, the condition of the ship. But as we read further, the tone changed. "The cargo isn't what they said it was. It's dangerous. I told them we shouldn't take it, but they didn't listen. Now the crew is acting strange, paranoid, angry. I'm starting to feel it too. We're not alone. Something's here, watching us." I felt my breathing quicken, each breath a struggle against the weight of the water and the words in that journal. I didn't want to read more. I didn't want to know what happened. But Carter kept turning pages. The final entry was short. They turned on each other. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the waves. It was us. I locked the cargo hold. God help anyone who opens it. Carter had vanished into the darkness. His flashlight wavered a few times before going out completely. Emily clung to my arm, her wide eyes panicked behind the mask. I turned to look for Tom, but he was no longer where I'd last seen him. The strong current had dragged us apart, pushing each of us into different corners of the wreck. I struggled to steady the beam of my flashlight, sweeping it across the debris around me. Ahead, the rusted door, the one leading to the cargo hold, remained slightly ajar. It didn't look like an escape route. It looked like a trap, waiting. Suddenly, I saw Tom. He was standing in front of the door, one hand on the hinge, preparing to open it. I wanted to scream, but underwater, all screams are just useless bubbles. I swam toward him as fast as I could, the pressure of the water weighing heavily on my chest. I grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back, but he jerked away from me, shaking his head. He pointed at the door, his expression equal parts determined and unhinged. "Don't," I thought. I couldn't speak, but every fiber of my body tried to communicate that one word. "Don't open it." But Tom didn't listen. He pulled the door open, and it swung wide with a shrill, unnatural screech, an eerie sound that had no place underwater. Behind the door was a pitch-black void, but not completely. I saw faint, glimmering shapes shifting in the darkness, as if the beam of my flashlight wasn't strong enough to fully illuminate them. Tom's breaths came faster through his regulator, his gaze fixed on whatever lay inside. But within seconds, his body jerked violently, as though an invisible force had grabbed hold of him. He was being pulled in. I swam closer, grabbing his arm, but the current surging from the cargo hold grew stronger, dragging both of us toward its gaping maw. Emily appeared behind me, clutching my leg to keep us from being swept away. But then I saw it. Movement in the darkness. It wasn't a fish or a swirl of water. It was ropes. Frayed, decayed ropes, tied into strange, intricate knots. They floated like they had a will of their own. Tom thrashed, but one of the ropes wrapped tightly around his leg, dragging him deeper into the shadows. He turned back toward me, his eyes filled with a terror I would never forget. I wanted to save him. I really did. But the pull of the current was too strong. "Tom!" I screamed in my head, knowing he couldn't hear me. And then he was gone. The cargo door slammed shut with a deafening finality, as if it had never been opened. For the first time in my life, I felt what true helplessness was. When we reached the surface, no one spoke. Tom looked pale, Emily couldn't meet anyone's eyes, and Carter wouldn't let go of the journal. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sound of the waves against the hull of our boat. I couldn't stop thinking about the scratches, the knots, the stains, and the door we didn't open. The next morning, we decided to report the wreck, but when we checked our maps, the coordinates were gone, erased, as if the wreck had never existed. I still dream about that ship. Not the wreck itself, but the feeling of it, the silence, the weight of the water, and the knowledge that some secrets should stay buried. I never thought sounds could haunt me this much. As a marine scientist, I've spent my entire career exploring the unknown depths of the ocean. But this place, the Silent Zone, was unlike anywhere I'd ever been. It wasn't just silent. It felt like it was listening to us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We were tasked with retrieving the black box from a plane that had gone missing 15 years ago. A mysterious crash, with no survivors and no explanations. All previous attempts to locate it had failed, until now. Advances in technology finally allowed us to detect the wreckage, hidden deep within a trench on the ocean floor. The signal was clear, but my feelings about this mission were not. Our research vessel anchored over unstable waters, with light winds making the surface ripple in an unusual way. Each wave felt like it was hitting me directly, tightening my chest for reasons I couldn't explain. Elliot Marks, our team leader, seemed to be the only one excited. I couldn't share his enthusiasm. Something felt off. We deployed the ROV, remotely operated vehicle, into the trench. The screen on board began showing blurred images from the ocean floor. Twisted metal fragments, deformed seats, and finally, the black box. It lay silently amidst the wreckage, small but menacing, as if it knew it was the source of everything. The ROV retrieved the black box and brought it aboard. Elliot was eager to examine it immediately, but I wasn't so sure. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, driven, ambitious, but tinged with something almost obsessive. We played the contents of the black box. At first, it was just routine sounds, the pilot's voice, technical commands. But then, something else crept in, sounds I couldn't explain. A hiss, a faint whisper, like wind passing through a crack in the door. Elliot dismissed it as interference, but I didn't believe him. It didn't sound like static, it sounded like a voice. The pilot's voice grew more frantic in the final moments. He shouted something, but it was cut off by a deeper, louder noise. A scratching, or a knocking, I couldn't be sure. The more I listened, the more it felt like those sounds weren't coming from the plane, but from somewhere else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. The waves hitting the hull of the ship sounded like invisible fingers tapping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice from the black box. But what unsettled me most was how familiar it started to sound, as if it was echoing my own thoughts. The next day, we decided to replay the recording. This time, the sounds were clearer. It wasn't just scratching or whispers, it was crying. A woman's voice, weak and repetitive.
Someone is watching. He's there.
I looked at Elliot. He frowned but said nothing. One of our team members, Alex, began acting strangely. He insisted he could hear tapping from below the ship. When I checked, everything seemed normal, but Alex wouldn't let it go. "It's calling me," he said. I didn't know what it was, but I saw something change in his eyes. That night, Alex disappeared. We found his diving suit empty, drifting near the trench. There were no signs of how he had gone down. All that remained was a dark, cold void, ready to swallow anything that dared approach. Elliot said nothing. He motioned to play the black box one last time before we left. I didn't want to hear it again, but I couldn't object. When the sound began, I realized I had been wrong. This wasn't just data, it was something else entirely. At first, it was the familiar sounds, scratching, knocking, but this time a voice emerged. It wasn't the pilot's, it wasn't a passenger's, it was Alex's. "Help me," the voice repeated, but not just once. Each time we replayed it, his voice grew closer, clearer, as if he was right there on the ship. No one spoke. Elliot stood frozen as the sound continued. I felt like the entire space around us was breathing, waiting for our response. And then I heard my own voice. "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here." My chest tightened, the words repeated over and over, the familiarity freezing me in place. It was me. But I didn't remember saying those words. The whispers from the black box blended with the sound of waves against the hull, forming an eerie harmony I knew I'd never forget. On the last night, I heard tapping from below the ship. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, deliberate knocks, as if someone was at the door. But this time, I didn't check. I didn't want to know. The next morning, we left. The black box sat in the storage bay, but I knew I had brought something else back with me. An unease, a question without an answer. Had Alex truly disappeared, or was he still down there in the darkness with the secrets we were never meant to uncover?